Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. This month that we're starting is called One More Day. One More Day, tribute to recovery and World Suicide Month. And when we think about suicide, a lot of times it's a hard topic. Some of the numbers that recently been shared in 2020, 800,000 people have completed suicide. Amongst them, 107,000 of them were drug overdoses in the United States during 2021, an increase of 15%. One of the quotes I used to put on my website in the very beginning, I still have it, is from Juliette Lewis. She says, "The bravest thing I ever did was continuing my life when I wanted to die." Healing comes in all shapes and sizes. Today, we have a new guest. Her name is Dr. Marni, is that right?
Yes, it
Dr.
is.
Marni. I was scared to continue on. Marni
That's okay. It's Foderaro.
Foderaro. Okay.
Foderaro.
Is that Italian?
It is.
Okay, I should know this. I'm from Jersey. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
And sharing with it, just continuing the dialogue. I thought the idea of one more day says a lot when we think about recovery. Disclaimer for those who are watching, those who are listening: if you are in the United States, 988 is a new crisis lifeline. They're still getting the bugs out, but I heard it's supposed to be a simpler or easier way to find help if you're in crisis. But wherever you are in the world, I do encourage you to find what resources, because resources are different for each person. I always say this, Marni, that people say it better than myself. Alice Walker says it this way, just to start our conversation: the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. What comes to mind when you hear this quote?
Wow, what a powerful quote. I guess what comes to my mind is that people stay in unhealthy, toxic, and even abusive relationships longer than they should. And that is true for so many different people. And it could also be true that they stay in unhealthy work relationships or work scenarios as well.
Yeah, it doesn't really have any. There's not really a protection from any grouping of people. Me being a faith leader, I know even in church, it's very hard. You're in a church setting, someone may be, there might be a praise, like someone has gone through chemo, or there's no more cancer right now. They're in remission. And that's wonderful news. But the dynamic is that that's not wonderful news for everyone, because maybe someone have lost someone's, or they're no longer here. So the dynamic of people is complicated, but why we do it, why we care, a lot of times is simple. I always ask my guests who are new, tell me about yourself. What brings you here? What brought you to where you are today? I want to give this opportunity to you to kind of share.
Yeah, sure. Well, I am an author of a 5-book series called True Deceit, False Love, which came about from my own research and awareness regarding domestic violence and narcissistic abuse, parental alienation, and intergenerational family trauma. And, it is very fitting to actually be speaking, with this theme that you have, a tribute to recovery and, to World Suicide Month. I personally have never been suicidal or been diagnosed with depression or anything like that. However, I have experienced some extreme traumatic situations personally. I chose to leave a very unhealthy marriage after 27 years. And for so many years, I did not realize the red flags that were presented to me for, countless years. I just ignored them because I was projecting my own belief that people are good and that everyone I surround myself with has my same values of honesty, love, faith, forgiveness, working together. And it was a very hard realization that there are people out there with malevolent agendas that really don't have those same values. And it comes in a light bulb moment, usually very gradually, but you realize, hey, wait a minute, this is not safe for me. This is not healthy. In fact, with abusers, a very common thing they do is isolate people from their support system. And that was happening to me as well. That they do a smear campaign, and they pretty much get family, friends, and neighbors to align with them and kind of believe some kind of false narrative, whatever it is. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people that find themselves in this situation that are on the brink of suicide, or are, or don't feel that they have anywhere to turn. And, for me, I found writing to be very healing. Definitely researching and learning about what I was dealing with. Really that knowledge helped me handle so many of the challenges I was facing. And another thing that, should be mentioned along with this topic is that, it's a something people don't like to talk about at all, but abusers can take it to another level, to where they not only try to get you to kill yourself, but they could actually, kill you. They could, even if it's by proxy, even if they're not the ones getting their hands dirty, they can, cause an accident or something like that. Or mental abuse could lead to physical issues, and you could end up developing autoimmune disorders and things that will eventually really impair you. And so that is something to be aware of as well. But I bring a message of hope and inspiration and tools, some resources to help people who feel they might be in this situation, to realize that, all hope isn't lost, and that, with some research, with some inner reflection, and doing kind of the deep dive work on your own intergenerational family trauma and what makes you who you are, and, all that understanding can help you put one foot in front of the other and carry on for one more day.
Yeah, I just want to tell those who are watching and listening, all the books that the links will be in the notes. So you can just scroll down if you were interested to find out more of what Dr. Marni is doing, or you want to get a book yourself. There'll be links in the notes of this episode, not only in the audio but also in the obviously YouTube version. I want to also say to you, Dr. Marni, I do, it is unfortunate that we do get sometimes we adapt too quickly, and sometimes we use adaptation like its strength, but sometimes it also kind of numbs and dulls the senses of what's really happening around us. Unfortunately, I work in the mental health field, and I see a lot of times, when we think about stigma, we kind of don't consider the cultural implication or the intergenerational. There's different generations, and sometimes, and not all the times, there is abuse. I'm not saying that, but sometimes it's simply uneducated. They don't know. Sometimes it's just they think of mental health as they are just focusing on the tangible needs. This person needs a house. This person needs, food, which is great. But I've met and I've experienced, and I know even personally, people will have all the benefits. They may even have the medication, the access of care, but they're still miserable. They still don't feel good. They still, and what you're talking about, the mental abuse, it's so subtle. Sometimes it's derived by fear, and a lot of times the person may think they're actually helping. They actually feel that I feel when you say self-reflection, and then the idea of putting boundaries. I feel boundaries has been a coined word since 2020, since the whole COVID. People realize that, hey, I really need boundaries. At least I've heard people talk about it. But it's important to reflect, because I feel a lot of times when we think about domestic abuse, it's not black and white. What I mean by that, it's different, and I feel sometimes people don't consider the good cultural, and some of the abuse doesn't seem like abuse because you're so in it for so long, and you make a lot of excuses. But until you take that moment, that step forward, and say, I want to change, and that takes a lot. I know it's if it's a 5-year problem, some people want a shortcut. It never is, but there's a way to get help immediately, so you're not in danger in that regard.
Right. And something that, people, your audience should know is oftentimes if you do realize the kind of malevolent person you're dealing with, and you plan an escape, or, you just kind of leave, realize that many times the abuse will ramp up. You will look back and say, wow, I was financially abused. I was sexually abused. I was emotionally, even physically abused. But then could come the legal abuse, where they continue to take you to court over frivolous things just to keep engaging with you. They stalk you and harass you. It doesn't matter how far you move away. Like in my case, I retired from a career as a high school special education teacher in the Chicago suburbs. And when I retired, I moved to the Caribbean, partly to just experience, a happier, more peaceful life, immersed in nature, closer to God. But also part of it was to get as far away from my abuser as possible. But it doesn't matter in this day and age with technology and everything. You still have to be vigilant and look out for yourself. But you can find, you were talking about boundaries, and I think that is so very important, but it's a very hard thing to implement. I'm in my 60s and I'm still navigating how to put up healthy boundaries, because we get so familiar with our relationships and situations. We might think that that's normal, or, when we get removed from it, we might realize, whoa, it is so much more peaceful without this chaos and constant criticism and challenging. And, some people love to engage that way. And they might think that that's a positive way to engage, and it's not always well received by everyone. So then you have to decide and make some, discernment about who you let in your life, at least how far you let them in your life. Or when it comes to some people that have been in your life for a long time, you need to determine, what are the pros and cons here? The big thing is you do need to look out for yourself, because really you are the only one that can make these kind of decisions for yourself.
Yeah, and I feel also understanding roles, of people in your life. I feel another aspect is you get away from your abuser, you get away from the trauma. It doesn't end there.
No,
That's the thing. The thing is, the healing starts, and that's going to be, when it comes to at least from my experience, when it comes to boundaries, the tricky thing about it is it's not just I'm just going to stop doing this entirely, because there's some things that were good, so it's just prioritizing what's important to you, and the only way you can do that is when you know who you are and what you want. A lot of times you have friends and families who say, oh, you need to do this, and they want to help you, but when you actually ask yourself, what do I want, what helps me? Like for me, I know I love video editing, I love doing this kind of stuff, I love talking. Some people will be like, Rob, you had a long week at work, why do you do this? Because I like to do it. This fulfills my life, but someone else,
and you're connecting with people, making a difference in this world, one person at a time. And that's so important. And we can, and it's important to look at the positives in your life, because everything isn't, like you said, all black and white. It's not all good or all bad. In fact, that's an unfortunate dynamic with parental alienation, where there's wonderful fathers and mothers who have lost their young or adult children to this unfortunate dynamic where the kids will align with more the abusing parent, not the loving parent who always provided unconditional love. And those kids have kind of that independent thinker phenomenon or Stockholm syndrome, where everything is just black and white. There's only one good parent and one bad parent, when really they've been fed a false narrative, and it's not all good or all bad. So we need to look at that. And I think it's so important for us to do our own inner work and reflection to realize our role in situations. What will make us an extreme empath? What would make us an overgiver that isn't necessarily well received by everyone? What made us a target for someone? Even accomplished, very successful people, very balanced people can find themselves in unhealthy, toxic situations, and they need to navigate their way out of it. And it really is a journey. It's a process. And like I said, I found writing to be very healing. I have a 5-book series called True Deceit, False Love that gives resources and tools and a creative response to try to navigate these things with word search puzzles and poetry and a survivor's workbook, so people can, try to heal, find a different way to heal, because not everyone wants to or can afford to go to a counselor or, there's just so many, like what's up on your screen right now. Healing can come in various ways. Yeah. And you need to find what works for you and pursue that.
I totally agree. A lot of times, especially in my line of work, I don't like reinventing the wheel. If something did help you before, it's funny. People ask me, "Well, Revive Ministries, is that? Are you proselytizing?" I'm like, no. This is purely an outreach, like a mission. You go to the countries. I remember I kind of had to articulate it because with the word revive, it's denoted the component of Christianity, of salvation, and all that wonderful stuff if you're a Christian. But really, what I wrote it over here. I'm going to share it. Really, it's just. It's a medical mission providing a safe place for us to continue the discussion. A lot of times it gets thrown under the rug. It's hard to talk about. And that's another thing about this journey, is that it is going to be hard to talk about. And defining words. If I want to volunteer, because volunteering is a great thing to do when you're trying to connect, but understanding helping is inconvenient. I know that sounds funny, but a lot of times we overextend ourselves. So we may be too passive in our approach how we communicate. When maybe like someone might say, "Oh, can I have a ride?" and you don't have the ability to give you a ride because you have other obligations, but you don't set those boundaries. But you want to help because it makes you feel good. Understand that your needs are as important as theirs. If you could address both of them at the same time, that's when you are more effective in how you communicate and navigate.
Right. And actually, just having these candid conversations about uncomfortable topics that so many of us deal with. I mean, most likely everyone within their family system has someone who has dealt with mental health issues, with suicide, with abuse, with just not feeling, good about themselves, whatever it is. All of this can snowball and can be a perfect storm, unfortunately, and people around you might not even know it. So having these conversations, even if it just reaches one person, that means you've helped one person realize that they're not alone. And that there are tools to deal with things, and there are many people that are experiencing similar situations.
Yeah, and I also I read a book. It's called Seculosity. I do recommend it if anyone want to. It talks about this enoughness, that we all kind of get subjected to, and I feel a lot of times. That can kind of halt our, us even recognizing that, it is an issue. I know family members within my own family that would talk to the most toxic person each week as an obligation, because if they don't do this, then they're bad. You
Right.
know, or
All these
whatever.
expectations,
Yeah, yeah.
and really, you might be doing more harm to yourself, and actually even perpetuating
Mm,
like an unhealthy relationship by
mm,
continuing to do that. And you need to give yourself permission, but it's a very slippery slope, especially when you're dealing with family, because
yeah.
there is this societal
Mm,
expectation that,
mm-hmm,
well, they're your family, you have to have them, you have to do this and do that, when
mm,
really they're people, just and some people feel closer to people that are not within their family unit.
mm,
They feel more connected, more
mm.
understood.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And in the family dynamic, it's uniquely challenging because of that. Um, there's so much context, so much cultural context. Some things are just brought on, and it's just, and sometimes we don't even ask ourselves why we do what we do, and that's the journey. We're still. I feel the thing is, sometimes there's a Pratt study I read. A lot of times you see in social media, everyone's on vacation all the time. I don't know how they're on vacation all the time, but there are. But the idea is that, when you're what's more approachable is someone who is struggling themselves, someone who has those bad days, those days that the best thing you got to do is get out of bed. That's a lot more approachable than someone who feels, you see, that seems like has it all figured out. No, I
Right.
feel like
Well, and
all.
people portray that, like you said, I'm not on social media,
Mm-hmm.
but people will portray only the best,
Yeah.
or they might fake it. They might put a
Mm-hmm.
front forward and give the impression that everything is just fine, when really, people are dealing with real issues all the time. And
Mm.
you have to be careful who you talk to about it or whatever, but it's more important to be real. and
Yeah.
and and I think people can connect with real people, real situations,
Yeah.
especially if they've been through something similar to what you're going through. You could even get some guidance and some wisdom and some suggestions on how other people handle it. It's still totally up to you how you are going to cope with your situation.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very important to have these candid conversations, really.
And you mentioned writing.
Mhm.
Whenever it comes to coping skills, there's always, there's this idea of purging or being able to write things out. And there's
Mhm.
other ways you could do that. Is, when you're in a support group or you're with friends, you tell your story.
Sure.
Another way, more artistic, is music. There's a lot
Right.
of, these all these platforms for us to express ourselves. I feel can be very helpful. um I say, there was one quote, a sad song is only as sad as the listener is, or something like that,
Mhm.
and it's true. I feel there's some honesty with sad songs, because when you hear a lot more hits that are sad. Let's just be
Sure.
honest. There's a
Sure.
lot of great songs that are sad, because I feel there's something honest that we all can relate to in some shape or form. I want to share this real quick. It is the domestic violence hotline. You can call it. I know some people are, like I said, healing comes in various ways. But if you're in crisis, this might be a useful tool or resource for you. I want to ask, shift gears a little bit.
Sure.
I know that you've shared a bit about this, but I also like, you told what has helped, and, in length, but what has not helped. I want to kind of emphasize that when it comes to your own personal journey, what going through, you know, leaving someone that was not good for you anymore, and moving forward and trying to establish what has helped. And I know you mentioned that, but also what has not helped.
Gosh, I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. So
Hmm.
let me think about it here. Um, so, what has not helped? I suppose, confiding in some people that don't get it,
Hmm.
that just have a generic answer for you, or that
Hmm.
aren't invested in you personally. Um, I will say at one point early on, I was granted an order of protection against my abuser,
Mm-hmm.
and I was very hopeful because I was meeting with a social worker who actually was part of a police department, and they directed me to some domestic violence support groups, as
Mm-hmm.
far as even assigning a counselor to me who would go into court with me when I needed to request that this would be extended. Well, that was not that helpful, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest with you, because the abuser came all lawyered up. In fact, the judge winked at the lawyer like they knew each other. They had it all figured out before I even got there.
Mm-hmm.
And they had no interest in what I had to say. In fact, I had video recording that I thought was going to be pretty important to share, to show, hey, I do have some reasons to be concerned for my safety. And the judge had no interest in looking at any video or even just hearing anything that I had to say. Like I said, it was all kind of figured out before. That was kind of a rude awakening for me, because you'd like to think that, in the judicial system, there would be some justice. There would be some, hearing of both sides. But that wasn't the case. And so in that particular case, the domestic violence support that I was getting wasn't really what I needed. I needed to have someone to advocate for me when I had trouble even speaking because of the fear, because of everything being so fresh, and because you do have to face your abuser in court, and that's very, very uncomfortable. So I guess we have expectations that certain agencies will help us, and for the most part, I think they really do. But I think that some situations, the help isn't what you would expect it to be.
Yeah,
And
and
it all comes down to where you need to protect yourself. You need to kind of navigate how you're going to keep yourself safe, and eventually heal and move on to live a happier life. It's kind of like up to you. So I think what doesn't work, I think, is completely relying on someone else to fix it for you.
I totally agree. I feel at the end of the day, it is always wise to get a second opinion. If you get like you have a new disorder that you never knew you had, it's good. It's always wise to do that, and it's also wise to take, for me in my field, the idea with the client relationship is, my goal is to get them self-advocating. The idea is you get to that point with their strengths and weaknesses, but understanding, that they begin to see that they have this value in themselves. Unfortunately, people are people, wherever agency, whatever department, and unfortunately, sometimes things fall through the crack. I don't feel things are maliciously done, but we are human, and unfortunately, as humans, I feel it all relies on you, on the direction of how your healing goes. And even when like I said, I don't like reinventing the wheel. I'm not going to tell someone who's not faith-based, I'm like, you got to go to church. You got to do other, because the thing is, I know that at the same time that church has done a lot of harm. And I don't know that individual story at this point.
And I'm glad you bring that up, because, people have different experiences with organized religion, which can be very different than belief in God and faith. And I'll tell you, my faith and belief in God has really helped me through so many times. I also, when there was a time in my life where I was more involved in organized religion, I found a great sense of community with that. And really, that was a great place for me to learn about God, to learn about the Bible. But yeah, definitely you can see hypocrisy in some organized religion, not all of them at all. And so I actually, the first book that I ever wrote was called God Came to My Garage Sale. And, I was at a very low point when I realized, even though I thought my house was paid off for 10 years, it was in foreclosure and I lost all my money and I had to have a garage sale. But instead of having negative feelings, I actually was very happy because I was embarking on something that I knew would be better for me. But I also had so much gratitude for the wonderful times that I had with my family, even with my ex-husband, even though I realize now so much was a false reality. At least at that time, I really had some very positive experiences, and at least in my mind I did. And so I was filled with love and gratitude. And I actually experienced spiritual miracles that made me question, is God here with me? Did God come to my garage sale? And that's, that book ended up winning awards. It was endorsed by James Redfield, the best-selling author of the Celestine Prophecy. It has appealed to people that are religious and people that are not. Because I think all of us, no matter where we are at in our faith journey, we question things. We want to know, why do bad things happen to good people? How can all this happen in the world that, is filled with corruption and fraud and malevolence? How can that happen when there's so many beautiful things in the world and people in the world? And so I think we all ask these questions, and so that really began my writing journey was, and that's the name of my website too, which is godcametomygarage.sale.com.
That's wonderful. There's a word, and my wife has a untranslatable words. It's nunchi. I'm half Korean, and it actually means a subtle, often unnoticed art of listening, engaging another's mood. The reason why this is important is that you mentioned before, a lot of times in the beginning, we begin to realize at the end of the day that we need to rely on us. We need to kind of rely on our own decisions. We need to find value in ourselves, not hinged on something else. In the beginning, we talked about black and white. Things are not always black and white. And the reason I feel sometimes, not all the time, people strive for black and white, because it's almost like you could kind of hedge the uncertainty in some way. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And sometimes, unfortunately, like you mentioned before, this is another word. It's in Hindi, jugad. It says ensuring that things happen even with the minimal resources. I say anyone who's been struggling, whoever had gone through recovery or gone through a downturn, understands this. When you're using what you can, but at the same time, you can kind of find that little silver line, like you're talking about, when you're actually blessed of the time. You're very present of, it's the change. Change is uncomfortable. But I remember when working with this at the church, a lot of times I ask church members, how do they view God? Because that will kind of reflect on how they treat themselves and others. And I feel also when we think about resources and how we think about how, if God is distant, we're going to treat people distantly. If God is angry, we're going to treat people angrily and judgmentally. But the benevolent side, with change, the one thing, at least for me, I was not always Christian. I never really believed in faith early on in my life. The one thing, just rationally, I thought to myself was, there's so much change. And then I thought to myself, there's so many variables. It's like almost daunting of how much uncertainty there is. You walk out the door, there's so many things that could happen that day. And what comforted me, not because of any destination after I die, more so the fact that God doesn't change, was comforting enough, because everything else does change. But change is not always bad, like you mentioned. How you look at it. I want to ask you, this has been wonderful. talking with you on all this, and I'm hoping those who are listening do find some of this, especially if you're on the fence, finding help, whatever that is. We're not saying this is the way, and we're saying
No.
find a way. Any pivotal milestone or lesson that helped propel you to where you are today. I know we mentioned a lot about your story, but I think stories is sometimes just like writing, just like music, some of the best ways we could communicate as a human being. So what has been the milestones and lessons you want to share with those listening?
There are many. I've been fortunate to be able to travel around the world
Mm-hmm.
and to meet people of all different faiths, all different ethnicities, all different cultures, all different backgrounds. And I think that we so many of us have so much more in common
Mm-hmm.
than we do have our differences.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that has been a big lesson for me that I learned early on in my life, because I always had an appreciation for, differences
Mm-hmm.
in people. I think coming to terms with the message that you cannot change other people,
Mm-hmm.
nor should you want to change other
Yeah.
people. You can only change yourself or how you respond to things. I think that has been very pivotal to me, because it, gave me the permission to step back from some situations
Mm-hmm.
that normally I would have continued to engage in.
Yeah.
But realizing that, you can't change other people,
Yeah.
and really it's up to you to, like, that's kind of been the theme of this whole discussion,
Yeah.
really, is we really have to take care of ourselves, and we have to love ourselves, and that can look different for different people, but I think we need to not only emotionally take care of ourselves, physically we need to
Yeah.
eat nourishing food, we need to get restorative sleep, we need to have some moderate exercise to keep us moving. So physically, we need to take care of ourselves. And then we've also talked about spiritually,
Mm.
that spiritually, we need to take care of ourselves as well.
Yeah. I just everything you're hitting on really speaks volumes,
Mhm.
because at the end of the day, um, sometimes we over-explain. When we're in the thick of it, every single family member needs to understand what I'm going through, and you know what? They're not. They're not. And like they still love you. They still care about you. But the thing is, when you start piecing back the value that you kind of threw towards other people to give you value, things start to change how you look at it. And it's not so much you're going to spend so much time making them see it your way, but you start appreciating that, hey, this person feels this way because of the context of where they are. I also notice with there's always a mental health stigma. I think it's more complicated. You look at generational. They never experienced this as children. The ones who were born in the 1950s, 1940s, they don't know none of this stuff. And there's a big change. They're used to a different context, a different America, different what they're brought up. And for me to just assume that they will totally understand from my context, I feel we don't listen well. And I think that's one thing I want to also add on to this. Learn to have restraint and listen. Understand that what your thoughts. You're gonna make mistakes, but if you feel you're valuable and you're investing in yourself, that's just part of the process. It's not the the final thing for you. I want to ask you as we wrap up. It's been wonderful talking to you. Any final thoughts you want to share with those listening today?
Well, I mean, a few things. So many people try to get their validation from external sources.
Mm-hmm.
How many likes am I going to get on social media?
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to get the approval of my parents if I do this?
Mm-hmm.
Will my friends still like me if
Mm-hmm.
I choose to change careers or whatever it is? We need to get back to validating ourselves internally. and not seeking out these external validations.
Mm.
And, my final thought would be really, we all have challenges in our lives. I talked about domestic abuse myself, but people have all sorts of challenges, whether it's, their health, whether it's, family relationships, whether it's a job, whether it's, will they have a roof over their head for the night? Or can they make it one more day, without thinking that, they need to do a permanent solution for a temporary problem, like with suicide. So we all have challenges, but if you can handle your challenges with love, honesty, and goodness, and a little bit of research, and learning about what you're going through, you will be able to put one foot in front of the other and carry on another day.
That's wonderful. One last thing I will say, just to wrap it up. Accountability is not a bad word when it's a safe place. Find that safe place wherever you are. It's not, when I wake up, I'm like, I want to go for a jog. I know it's going to suck, to be honest. If I want to do some exercise in the morning and I'm on a stay in bed, we know this. But sometimes when we know this and we remember this, we understand what we need to do to prepare. And, when we start investing in ourselves, things change, and what I've seen, they change for the better. Thank you, Dr. Marni, for just joining us and sharing your insight.
It's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you, and I just admire you for the work that you are doing, and bringing awareness to all sorts of issues and helping people.
Again, I always appreciate my guests. It's not easy to come out here and just share what we do, but that's why we do it. It's not about doing the easy. Remember to stay updated with all things Revive Ministries with the various platforms, ReviveMinistriesFL.com. This is goodbye from Revive Ministries Podcast. Leaving with this last quote is from F. Scott Fitzgerald. Never confuse a single defeat with the final defeat.